ASEAN stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It is a group of 10 countries in Southeast Asia. These countries are Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Together, they form an important economic bloc. In 2024, about 678 million people lived in ASEAN countries. Their total economy, or GDP, was around $3.9 trillion. This makes ASEAN a significant player in the world. These nations work together on many issues. Economic cooperation is a very important part of their partnership and their strategy for growth and stability in the region. The economic relationship between ASEAN and China is getting stronger. China is now ASEAN's biggest trading partner. This means they buy and sell more goods with China than with any other single country or bloc. In 2023, the total trade between ASEAN and China reached a very large sum. This amount was $468.8 billion. This shows a big increase of 10.5% compared to the year before. ASEAN's trade with China is a big part of China's total foreign trade too. It made up 15.9% of China's trade with the world in 2023, showing how important these Southeast Asian nations are to China's economy. Let's look closer at the trade numbers. In 2023, China sold goods worth $283.2 billion to ASEAN countries. This was an increase of 14.2% from the previous year. At the same time, ASEAN countries sold goods worth $185.6 billion to China. This was an increase of 5.2%. Within ASEAN, Vietnam was China's biggest trading partner in 2023. The trade between Vietnam and China alone was $223.2 billion. Other important trading partners for China in ASEAN include Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, and the Philippines. These 6 countries do most of the trade between ASEAN and China. Investment between China and ASEAN is also very large and growing. By July 2023, the total amount of money invested between China and ASEAN countries was more than $380 billion. This includes money invested by China in ASEAN and by ASEAN countries in China. In 2022 alone, Chinese companies invested $18.65 billion directly into ASEAN nations. The countries that received the most Chinese investment were Singapore, which got $8.3 billion. Indonesia received $4.55 billion. Vietnam received $1.7 billion. Singapore also has the largest amount of total Chinese investment over time, with $73.45 billion. This shows deep financial connections. Having strong economic ties with China brings many benefits to ASEAN countries. It helps their economies grow. It creates jobs for their people. However, depending so much on one country can also be a problem. This is what experts call a dependency dilemma. If China's economy faces problems, ASEAN economies could also suffer a lot. Also, if one country has too much economic power over another, it might try to use that power. It could influence political decisions or actions. This is a worry for many in Southeast Asia who value their independence and want to make their own choices. Several agreements make trade between ASEAN and China easier. One is the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area, or ACFTA. Under ACFTA, more than 90% of goods have had zero tariffs since 2019. This means no taxes are paid when these goods cross borders. Another important agreement is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. RCEP includes ASEAN, China, and other countries like Japan and Australia. It aims to remove tariffs on about 92% of goods over 20 years. These agreements are good for trade, but they also make ASEAN countries even more connected to China's economy, increasing the dependency. China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, is another reason for growing ties. The BRI is a huge plan by China to build infrastructure. This includes roads, railways, ports, and power plants in many countries. China invests a lot of money in these projects. For example, China spent $7.3 billion to build Indonesia's first high-speed railway. These projects can help ASEAN countries develop, but they also mean ASEAN countries often borrow a lot of money from China. This can lead to large debts. It also connects their infrastructure and economies more closely to China for many years to come. Many leaders and people in ASEAN countries know about these risks. They are happy about the economic growth that trade with China brings, but they are also careful. They worry about becoming too dependent on China. They do not want to be in a situation where China has too much control or influence over their economies or their policies. This is why there are discussions within ASEAN about how to manage this relationship. They want to find ways to keep the benefits of trade with China, but they also want to protect their own interests and ensure they are not too vulnerable. Western countries, especially the United States, say they want to help ASEAN. They offer security support. For example, the Shangri-La dialogue is an important meeting. Military leaders and defense ministers from many countries talk about security issues there. The US often speaks about protecting ASEAN countries from possible aggression. It also increased military cooperation with some ASEAN members. The US emphasizes the importance of freedom of navigation in the seas, particularly the South China Sea. These actions are presented as ways to ensure stability and protect the independence of ASEAN nations against a rising China. The United States is also an important economic partner for ASEAN. It is ASEAN's second-largest trading partner. In 2024, the total trade in goods between the US and ASEAN was estimated at $476.8 billion. This is a very large amount. The US has started programs to work more closely with ASEAN. For example, there is the Mekong-US Partnership. This focuses on countries along the Mekong River. In 2022, the US and ASEAN also created the US-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. This aims to deepen cooperation on many issues, from economic growth to climate change and health security. These efforts show that the US values its relationship with ASEAN. However, some people see a problem with the West's approach. They say Western countries, including the US, offer security protection, but their economic policies may not do enough to help ASEAN reduce its dependency on China. Sometimes these policies can even seem to make things harder for ASEAN economies. For instance, there have been talks about the US putting new taxes or tariffs on goods from some ASEAN countries. Reports in April 2025 suggested possible tariffs of 49% on goods from Cambodia and 46% on goods from Vietnam. Such high tariffs could badly hurt these economies, some of which are still developing. Furthermore, US economic plans for the region have faced criticism. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPF, is one such initiative. It aims to strengthen ties with countries in the Indo-Pacific region. However, IPEF is not a full trade deal like RCEP or ACFTA. It does not offer the same level of access to the US market by reducing tariffs broadly. Some experts say that if the US truly wants to help ASEAN become less reliant on China, it needs to offer more attractive economic partnerships. Security assurances are important, but strong and fair economic opportunities are also crucial for ASEAN's long-term stability and choice. ASEAN nations are aware of the need to balance their relationships. Recently, there have been more discussions about how to reduce over-reliance on any single partner. One interesting development is the idea of an ASEAN-China GCC economic forum. The GCC, or Gulf Cooperation Council, includes wealthy oil-producing countries in the Middle East. A meeting was held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia in May 2025. Chinese Premier Li Qiang attended. The goal was to improve trade and cooperation between these three groups in areas like supply chains, infrastructure, and finance. This suggests ASEAN is exploring wider partnerships, even if China is part of them. To genuinely help ASEAN diversify, Western countries could take several positive steps. Instead of proposing new tariffs, they could reduce existing ones on goods from ASEAN countries. This would make it easier for ASEAN businesses to sell their products in Western markets. They could also offer better trade terms and incentives. This means creating trade deals that are fair and beneficial for ASEAN nations, especially the less developed ones. Such actions would provide real economic alternatives. They would show that the West is serious about supporting ASEAN's economic strength and independence, not just its security. Another important way the West can help is by actively supporting economic diversification within ASEAN itself. This means investing in different sectors of ASEAN economies, not just traditional ones. For example, they could support the growth of technology industries, renewable energy, or advanced manufacturing, providing training, sharing technology, and helping to build skills within ASEAN countries would empower them. This would help ASEAN nations develop new strengths and new products to sell to a wider range of global partners. This creates more resilience and reduces the risk of depending too much on one market or one source of investment. In conclusion, ASEAN faces a complex challenge. It needs to manage its important economic relationship with China carefully. The benefits are clear, but so are the risks of dependency. ASEAN nations themselves are looking for ways to create more balance. Western countries, including the United States, have a significant role to play. They can help by offering genuine economic partnerships and supporting ASEAN's own efforts to diversify. This is not about forcing ASEAN to choose sides. It is about providing real options so that Southeast Asian nations can build a more stable, prosperous, and independent future for themselves.